That's okay.
About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be. Life with no distractions. We'll get away. This is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good afternoon, good evening. John here from Tutor2 HQ. Welcome you to this, our third GCSE History live stream. A big welcome to anybody watching us live and also a very big and warm welcome to anybody watching us on replay, on catch up, like I know many hundreds, if not thousands of people have been doing. And why not? We love history, don't we? And one of the best things about history is that it runs like a television programme, one week after another, building up the excitement and the stories that go along. So we started in Germany 1918, a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the Spartacist rebellion last week. And this week we're going to talk about the Weimar Constitution. And I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful Rocky and Duncan. Good evening, both. How are you?
Good evening. Very well, thank you.
That's good, that's good. If you've not joined us on one of these before, we've got 30 minutes of activities and input on the Weimar Constitution. What we would really love is those of you who are watching live to get involved and contribute in terms of your suggested answers to the questions. So you've got the chat window there in YouTube, so please do feel free to join in and give us some of the answers. We'll be looking out for what's going on in the chat window and making sure that we respond to anything that's written in there. We'll also talk a little bit about what we'll do at the end of this session in terms of looking back over this video and looking at the PowerPoint slides as well. Thanks for joining us. So I think we'll get started, guys. Yeah, you two ready to go?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Here we go. First exercise, I think we've got conveyor belt quiz. Duncan, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you will have a minute to answer the 6 questions that are about to come by. So if we wait for that minute while the 6 questions come back, if you are watching live, feel free to type into the chat window a few answers. So if you know the answer to the question, do type it in. It'd be great to hear from you, and we'll go through the answers once we've heard the questions. Let's see how we do. Okay. Well, we saw a few answers come in there, some right ones. We'll go through them now. So it's still a chance to type an answer in if you haven't done already. So when were the first elections to the National Assembly, whose job it was to create a new constitution? It was January the 19th, 1919. Anything further to add to that, Rocky? Or...
So the actual negotiations start February the 1st. But yeah, the election result is January the 19th, and then from there the National Assembly start to discuss the constitution or the makeup of it.
Fantastic. Let's have a look at the next one. Because of the unrest in Berlin, where did the newly elected National Assembly meet to create the Constitution? Hence the name. It was Weimar. That's why it's known as the Weimar Constitution, because they couldn't meet in Berlin, so they met in Weimar. Was that because of the uprising?
So in part of the uprising, and just even though sort of the Spartacist uprisings put down in January, you've still got problems. You've still got ensuing violence, lots of violence against particular ministers of state as well. So it's just a hotbed of tension. So they decide to head to this lovely little quiet town.
Good. Next one. When the Constitution was eventually introduced, which was the largest party in the Reichstag? Somebody got this one. It was the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. We heard quite a lot about them last week, if you joined us in relation to, the last 2 sessions, if you joined us for those. Okay. Should we have a look at the next one? The Constitution was finalised July the 31st, 1919. Which problematic agreement was made a month before? The Treaty of Versailles, which is going to keep coming up in some of these topics, isn't it? Because it's very significant. It was only a little while after that.
That's right. It ties in as well. We mentioned a couple of weeks ago about the Dolchstoß and the idea that many Germans felt that the regime had stabbed them in the back. As the Treaty of Versailles gets passed, the Dolchstoß becomes bigger and wider, if you like, in terms of the type of betrayal that the Germans feel. Because essentially it's some of the key characters that sign the armistice are the ones that sign the agreement at Versailles.
Okay, thanks, Rocky. Next one. Who was the president who oversaw the introduction of the Constitution? It was Friedrich Ebert. Again, he's come up a few times. We've heard that name quite regularly, haven't we? Okay, and the next one. How long did it actually take to reach an agreement on the nature of the Constitution? 6 months. So is that from when they started discussing it in February to the
Yeah. So
when it was signed in July.
absolutely, yeah. So February the 1st until July 31st. So obviously, if you
Hmm.
include the months of February, it's
Yes.
6 months. So some students, depending on what sort of textbooks they have access to, that it might talk about the Constitution being passed in July or coming into force in August, but that's the
Hmm.
reason, because it's voted in July 31st.
Okay, great. Next one. Oh, right. I'm going to hand over to Rocky now to talk us through this bubble quiz.
Great, thanks, Duncan. So, with the bubble quiz, we've got 5 questions, and as each question comes up in sequence, you'll have 4 potential answers. Now, the thing with the bubble quiz is that one of the answers could be correct, 4 of the answers could be correct, none of them could be correct. So, it's up to you to work out which of these are the correct answers. And as I say, all about the Constitution. So, you might want to mention just the letters if you want to add to the chat box regarding which answers are correct. So, first question: which of these were part of the German political system? Was it the President, Chancellor, Reichstag, or Reichsrat? They could all be wrong, they could all be right. Up to you
Or
to
anywhere in
decide.
between.
Or
Anywhere
anywhere
in
in
between.
between, exactly.
I'll give you a few seconds to put an answer in. We do have a few people in our live audience. It'd be nice to get some responses. So we will give you a moment. Okay, couple of interesting answers coming through.
I think sometimes this is quite useful to remember. I think when we hear the word constitution, we always assume, and it is obviously it's a written document, but it's a document that outlines how the political system works.
Ben said A, B, and C. Shall we
Okay,
see if that's right?
very good, well done. So, I mean, A, B, and C, you are correct. Obviously, the Reichsrat is part of it as well. So, in the within the German Parliament, essentially, you've got 2 houses: the Reichstag and the Reichsrat. And the Reichsrat ultimately represent a lot of the local government in Germany. So you've got a part federal system where there's national laws made, and then within the Reichsrat. Oh, Ben's just putting me to the sword here and saying that the the Reichsrat's irrelevant. Effectively, for your GCSE questions, Ben, I make you right. But ultimately, the Reichsrat is part of the Constitution. Although what you do see a bit later is that the Reichsrat can sometimes frustrate the Reichstag in terms of getting laws passed. So can be a useful little additional point for you, Ben, in an answer if you're aiming for the grade 9. But well done, 3 out of 4.
So just to help understand that Reichstag Reichsrat thing, is it a bit like, I know it's not the same, but is it a bit like House of Commons, House of Lords, or Congress, House of Representatives and Senate? If people sort of making a comparison with
Yes,
other things, that's sort of 2 chambers of a parliament.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so 2 chambers. It's probably more like it's more like the Senate and the House of
Yeah,
Representatives,
yeah,
um, in the sense that I mean the Reichstag tends to pass the federal laws, and then the Reichsrat can sort of it has an interest in the local government, which is known as the Land or the Lander, and so
okay,
they represent localized interests.
okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, number 2. So when was the Constitution written? November 18, December 18, January 19, or February 19? So you might want to think about what we covered with Duncan's round. See if you can
Well,
remember.
they can't all be right, can they?
Absolutely not.
I know the idea with the bubble quiz is, in theory, they could all be right, but I don't see how these ones could all be right.
No.
Are any of them right? Shall we have a look?
Yes, please. Yeah, none are correct. So obviously, as Duncan mentioned, the first election is January the 19th, 1919. I love that date, so easy to remember, lots of ones and nines. February 1919, they discuss, but it's not officially passed until July 31st. And as Ben's put, it's actually August, when, if you like, August the 1st is the first day in which the Constitution it comes into being. So yeah, well done, Ben. None are correct.
Wow.
Right, so question 3, which of this information about the Constitution is true? The voting age was reduced from 25 to 21. There were 18 local governments, known as land or Länder, might look different in different textbooks, that retained their own powers. Women were given the vote as well as men, and every party was allocated one representative per 60,000 votes. So quite detailed information, this one.
Give people a chance to answer. I know some of these. So again, remember, it could be none of them, it could be all of them, it could be anywhere in between. People are thinking about this one. Shall we have a look?
Okay, all correct. So I'll give you a little clue moving forward, everyone watching this live. If I tend to give quite detailed answers with these types of quizzes, they tend to be true, because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make up detailed answers. But yeah, you'll see here, all true. Voting age was reduced, which means more people are given the vote, more suffrage, more attempts at democratic government. With D as well, this is important because with the Constitution, they practice a system known as proportional representation, which means you've got more representatives from a wider, diverse range of parties, which on the one hand makes the system democratic, but on the other hand makes it quite difficult to pass laws. And with C as well, women being given the vote as well as men, combined with the voting age being reduced, Germany, in theory, according to its constitution, was essentially the most democratic country in Europe at that time. Okay. Question 4, which of these were true regarding the passing of laws under the Constitution? Laws would pass if the majority of delegates in the Reichstag and Reichsrat voted in favour. So majority, obviously over 50%, 51% of votes. Every delegate needed to vote for laws to be passed. So a delegate is basically a member of parliament. The Reichsrat could be overruled if a law was passed with a 2/3 majority in the Reichstag. And then D, coalition government made it difficult to get laws passed. So again, you might want to think about what I just said regarding proportional representation. So this might take a little bit longer again to process, but have a little look, see what you think. Quite tricky in places.
Yeah. There's some way you could probably, even if you haven't covered this yet, might be able to sort of apply a bit of general knowledge or even a bit of common sense to it. You wouldn't think that every delegate would have to vote for something for it to be passed, because you'd think you'd struggle to ever pass any laws in that scenario. If you compare it with modern political systems, there'd be very few times where everyone agreed.
That's right, with sporadic attendance. You might want to think, obviously, Duncan mentioned the comparison between the American system. You might want to think about how laws are passed also within the Senate and the House.
Mm-hmm. We know a bit about coalition governments, perhaps, even if you haven't talked about this in history yet, and whether that makes it more difficult or not. You can make links with modern Germany if you keep an eye on the news.
Yeah, good point. Should we have a look?
Yeah.
There you go. So, as you said, Duncan, Every delegate, you'd be waiting for a long, long time if you was expecting every delegate to arrive to vote. But yes, this one obviously A, C, and D. If you have a majority within the Reichstag and Reichsrat, the votes pass. Normally, the Reichsrat, because it represented local government, could often try and frustrate some of the more federal national laws that the Reichstag wanted to introduce. Therefore, they put in this caveat that if 66% of Reichstag delegates voted in favour of a law, then it would automatically pass. And then obviously coalition government makes it very difficult to get laws passed because you're constantly having to make deals with other parties and arguably compromise some of your values to get laws over the line, which annoys certain members of the German electorate, and some voters grow a little bit dissatisfied with that. Okay, last one. Elections were meant to be held, in theory, once every 4 years for what? The President, the Chancellorship, the Reichstag, or the Reichsrat? Again, you might want to think about how or what knowledge you have regarding other political systems and take a punt if you're not too sure. Any answers? I've got a few.
Couple coming in. So the chancellorship is a bit like prime minister, isn't it?
Essentially, yes.
A similar sort of role. So was that an elected role or was that an appointed role? Just out of interest. Were they directly elected?
Is it rhetorical or are you asking me? Sorry.
I'm asking you, but it is semi-rhetorical. I'm just sort of giving our audience food for thought. It was like
I'll answer in a minute, Duncan. The suspense. Okay, should we have a look?
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, well done. So Reichsrat and Reich, in theory, obviously the German system is chaos. So essentially coalition governments consistently fall apart and there's elections regularly, a lot more than once every 4 years. But essentially the Reichstag and the Reichsrat, in theory, are meant to be elected every 4 years. The president is elected every 7 years. So Eber is president from 18 and remains president until 25. Unfortunately, he dies and then Hindenburg becomes the next president. And the chancellor, as Duncan said, the chancellor is appointed. Now, normally what would happen is the chancellor would be the leader of the largest party voted in within the Reichstag. But often, particularly later on in the Weimar period, you see the president try and use essentially Article 48 or use his own powers to appoint the Chancellor. This is important actually because much later on, technically, Hitler should have been made Chancellor a little bit earlier because they win elections in 1932, but Hindenburg wants to frustrate the process because he doesn't trust him. But that's obviously for another day.
Absolutely. Yeah, but interesting. So we've got to categorise activity now, which I think Rocky's going to mainly talk you through this one. But shall I just explain what the activity is? So the idea of categorise is we have 3 columns essentially, and then 8 ideas, key terms, things, which you then basically sort under the 3 headings. You'll have 60 seconds to do the sorting. So some of those relate to the democratic nature of the Constitution, sort of elements of how democratic the Constitution is. Some look at checks and balances or separation of powers, so ways in which one part of the Constitution might act as a check or balance on another. And then finally, weaknesses of the Constitution, problems of the Constitution, ways in which it is shown to be weak. So you've got a minute to try and order those key points under the headings. You can, if you're joining in live, you can just type, say, for example, democratic and then the numbers, or checks and balances and the numbers, weaknesses and the numbers. Okay. If you're watching on catch up, you can pause the video for a bit and have a bit longer. Okay.
There we go.
How did you do?
Right. So we've got obviously democratic nature of the Constitution. Article 1 just relates to some of the things that we've already spoken about, the women having the vote as well as men, and the voting age being brought down from 25 to 21. Proportional representation. It ties in with coalition government. So effectively, you could have had 5 in there as well, and technically it still would have been correct. But proportional representation links to the idea that for every 60,000 votes, there would be a delegate or a representative within the Reichstag. Checks and balances and the separation of powers. Obviously, we talked about the Länder, which is localized government. Now, the Länder could have a say on education or localized issues, and which gave them a bit more freedom, because Germany is very diverse in terms of regional identity, for example. So it was very important that the Länder had some decision-making powers of their own. Likewise, the Reichstag and the Reichsrat, there's that separation of powers there, and potentially the Reichsrat could frustrate certain laws passed in the Reichstag if they didn't have that 2/3 majority. And obviously the president, by the president being able to appoint the chancellor, that's a key power. And by the president being able to use Article 48, which is basically emergency powers, so he can then rule almost like an authoritarian, essentially. The president provides a check and balance on the Reichstag also. Then tying into that, with the weaknesses of the Constitution, Article 48, as I say, allows the president to initiate emergency powers, so he can then rule by decree. Now, in theory, it could work if, there's more rioting and more protests, and you need this swift sense of justice. But ultimately, Article 48 serves to undermine democratic principles, because it does give the president that potential outlet to rule like an authoritarian. Division and violence constantly undermines the new system, as Duncan alluded to earlier. And obviously, we looked at the Spartakists last week. There's a lot more protests throughout the era. And then coalition government, in theory, obviously, you've got more parties and more representatives having a say. But in a country that is suffering such a huge political vacuum, it's very difficult to run an efficient government and efficient system. And in terms of German political culture, they're used to that efficiency. So often what happens is a lot of these parties, in order to get laws passed, they're tending to compromise some of their own values, which frustrates Germans who, in terms of their political culture, are used to efficiency and things being done very quickly. So well done, all of you, for having a go at that. It's quite tricky, and you'll see as well there's links between points and across these categories also. But the nature of the GCSE and hitting those top grades, if you can make those links and develop those explanations, you're going to get good marks.
Yeah, and I think the next activity relates to that, really, isn't it? Because it's the sort of essay question you might get, isn't it? A sort of 12-mark type question about, it relates to weaknesses of the Constitution, I suppose, by saying it's doomed from the start, going a bit further than that. But yeah, if people are coming up with 3 reasons for that, it's like kind of coming up with your 3 paragraphs, is it? I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea would be, explain why the Weimar Constitution could be seen to be doomed from the start. Like Duncan said, it's a perfect 12-mark question. You might have you would have stimulus points that would give you a guide as to what to do. But ultimately, we want that third paragraph to go beyond the stimulus points, so you can aim for those top marks. So if you can identify 3 clear reasons, or with some development as to why the Weimar Constitution could be seen as doomed, then you've got those 3 paragraphs, and you're well on your way to getting top marks. So I
So you've got 60
believe.
seconds. Yeah, got 60 seconds to come up with 3 reasons. Do chip in the chat window if you've got some ideas.
Think about what we covered just now and see if you can develop it slightly.
Oh, that went quicker, didn't it? Than it's because it's 30 seconds, not 60 seconds. Seemed to go really fast. Only have 30 seconds to answer all 3 questions, as Tutor T reminded you in the chat window. Shall we have a look at the answers?
Yeah. There we go. So you have like I said before, so proportional representation and the ideals, the democratic ideals behind that, I guess should be commended. But there's too many parties, the coalition government doesn't work, and what the German people get frustrated with is politicians who they see as having no backbone, because they're always prepared to do these backroom deals and water down their ideology and their manifestos to try and get laws passed across. Likewise, the use of Article 48 undermines those democratic principles of the Constitution. And with number 3, you've got the fact that, and it ties in again with PR and coalition government, it's inclusive of parties that deliberately try to undermine the new system. For example, the communists and the nationalists. So the nationalists on the right of the political spectrum and the communists on the left. So they are working, if you like, within Weimar to try and dismantle it from within. You could also, not that we only need 3, but don't be afraid if you are struggling to remember anything specifically about the Weimar Constitution. Don't be afraid to look at what we covered 2 weeks ago. Talk about that political vacuum. Talk about the sense that the people that sign or create this constitution are some of the same people that are involved in the Treaty of Versailles, some of the same people that are involved in the armistice, and many Germans are just suspicious. So it means you've not necessarily got people willing to work for the new government or within the system. So that's potentially a 4th one there.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, so we've got a missing vowels activity to finish with. So it's just some key terms, some of the terms we've talked about through this session. It's just, can you spot them with their vowels missing? So we've just got a few of these. And we're going to finish with this. So let's see how you do. So the first one, I always try and pronounce them. I don't know why. I think it's because I feel like going to Wales and reading the the signs. Democracy. Any idea what that one is? I think we've got it, haven't we? A few people got it. It is democracy. Well done if you got that one. Let's see this one. Okay, this is something that's been mentioned several times today.
That was very good.
Thank you. I was quite pleased with that one. I know people are getting this one, aren't they? Yeah, very well done. It is proportional representation. Okay, next up. Got to be careful how I say this one. Reticle Furtigurt. Reticle Furtigurt is possibly a little bit harder than some of the other ones. But we have it has been mentioned a couple of times in relation to potentially undermining the democratic ideals of the Constitution. Shall I have it's one a bit more tricky. It is Article 48. Well done if you got it. next one. And I think people get this one quite quickly. Culton government. The second word's a bit easy, isn't it? It's pretty clear. Government is just government, isn't it? So what would be the first word? Yeah, well done. It is coalition government. Good stuff. And then Suckledemkrutty. Again, there's some ones in there I think we got. Yeah, well done. It is the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. Very well done. Just a quick reminder on that slide that there are loads of study notes on the Tutor2 website. You do scan that QR code with your phone if you want to visit those. And we do have some resources. You can purchase an excellent exam buster revision guide on Weimar and Nazi Germany. And we do have some excellent resources on other topics too, which you may well be studying as part of your GCSE. Okay.
Wow. Thanks for that, Duncan. Thanks, Rocky. Absolutely fascinating as always. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Thanks to everybody who took part as well on the live chat. Big shout out, particularly to Ben, I think, who gave us some really good answers there. The thing that struck me, Rocky, as you were talking there, that phrase that you used, essentially Germany was the most democratic country in Europe at the time. Absolutely fascinating stuff, isn't it? We all know why Germany is covered in GCSE history because we know where it goes and what happens in the Second World War, as it were.
Yeah.
But to think that we went from the most democratic country in Europe, but I guess the feeling I got from that was it led to a power vacuum. It was too complex. The political system was too. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's democratic definitely in terms of sort of suffrage and people's opportunities to vote and get involved in the system. And the people themselves, they readily embrace that. The turnout is really, really high. But like you say, it's too complicated. And there's always this suspicion about whether the Constitution can work. And I think that's why Article 48's in there in the first place. It's that safety valve because previously Germans are used to being ruled by a Kaiser. But yeah, spot on.
Like I say, absolutely fast. I love it. Big thanks to Rocky and to Duncan for putting that together and presenting. Wonderful stuff. Again, thanks to everybody who got involved in answering the questions. Obviously, you can watch this video again. You can watch this whole session again. It'll be available to watch via YouTube almost immediately after we've finished. And don't forget, you can download the PowerPoints as well if you ever wanted to use those questions and the answers for yourself at some other point. Other than that, we're back next Monday at 5:30 again. Either you two gents remember which topic we're on next week?
Off the top of my head, I can't, but we will.
I should have warned you about that question, shouldn't I?
But we will let you know very soon. It will be another aspect of the Weimar Republic, I should think. But
okay.
moving readily through the 20s.
Okay. Excellent stuff, guys. Thanks again. Lovely to see you all, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.
See ya.